Hi everyone, if you like what I do, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and consider checking out my Patreon. Enjoy the video. The border world, Zen, had become the staging ground of an unknowable conflict which presumably spanned galaxies and entire dimensions, a struggle which would fold the very nature of reality upon itself, merely a tool for unseen orchestrators to conquer yet more territory. Prior to this, however, it had been a safe haven, a place gone unnoticed by those overconfident in their administration, somewhere the oppressed could once more gain their strength and strike back at those who had dominated them. Gods had begun. Humanity had players deep and challenging, different is less likely to get me horribly Like all other creatures thought to originate from Zen, human researchers had not known what to make of the Vortigaunts and the bulbous-headed creatures dubbed controllers. It appeared they held some common ancestry of sorts, each sporting a third thoracic limb, but beyond that they differed from all other forms of life retrieved by the research expeditions. Had the researchers known the truth of the aliens' origins, then they would have surely collapsed the portals and never spoken of the border world again. But the riddle of how anything could evolve in that bizarre nebulous realm of floating rocks was simple. Nothing had. It was merely an interdimensional dumping ground for anything unlucky enough to become caught in a portal storm or gravitational resonance eddy. Some creatures had been there so long that they had managed to eke out niches in the limited environments, making a home amongst beings native to entirely different planes of existence. Of course, this was only the case for all but Nihilanth and those bound to its fearsome will, for he would venture to the border world under duress, but willingly. It is unknown what their homeworld had really been like, with what little knowledge there is emerging from old Vortigaunt tales and murals. It is clear, however, that unlike the path of evolution followed on Earth, the world had produced not one but two distinct sapient species. Mankind had battled with its genetic siblings for dominance in the deep past, and perhaps once there had been multiple strains of Vortigaunt. But for these alien beings, this had not been a struggle between evolution's squabbling children, but the co-development of two separate branches on the tree of life. For their part, the Vortigaunts had become peaceful and agrarian shepherds of the native antlions, herding them and farming their essence, as their ancestors had done for time immemorial. The others were quite different, however. Whilst they shared a form of the Vortigaunts' talent for electrokinesis, their abilities, it seemed, were much greater, including an aptitude for both telekinesis and telepathy. A race of two castes, the so-called controllers were numerous and a common sight, diligently working on whatever they had been tasked to, but in truth they were nothing without their overseers. Gigantic fetus-like creatures, far fewer in number, and sequestered away, commanding their minions through a form of telepathy, akin almost to the queen of a beehive. Unlike their passive brethren though, they did not use their abilities as a tool or means of defense, but rather to further their own ends and grow in power. The name of the species would ultimately be lost, but in the dark times to come, the last of their kind would take the moniker of the Nihilanth, a term it found fitting for all its people had gone through and the complete meaninglessness it had found in the cosmos. For ages untold, their ever-growing lust for power served them well in becoming the dominant species of their world, but soon the constraints of their own reality tightened around them, and they sought to explore and exploit new realms. Combining their power, the overseers would come to find a method of shattering the fabric of space-time, opening rifts to places they were not capable of even dreaming of. They opened portals to distant worlds within their own universe, and entirely different dimensions alike. But it was not until they found the border world that everything changed. Stumbled on entirely by accident, a failed experiment broke through to a place that was neither local space nor beyond, but a domain that bridged the two, potentially the space that linked all realities. Here the overseers and their controllers found the crystals, a seemingly naturally occurring substance that enhanced their power beyond reason. It allowed each overseer to open portals and teleport anything they wished at will. What's more, the strength they drew from the crystals had made them near impervious to any and all harm. This, at least, is what they had believed. But powers far beyond their own ambitions had taken note of their dalliances in dimensional travel, and would come to prove that they had never been as superior as they had thought. In short order, the Combine, a pan-dimensional empire of authoritarian might, would lay claim to this new world, and go about incorporating every living thing into their own ranks. From each of their conquests, the Combine had used individuals as raw material, twisting them into loyal cybernetic slaves, programmed only to conduct a single task. Of all the beings of this world, the Overseers had surely experienced the worst the Combine had to offer. At this point, they were far too powerful to be trusted with any form of autonomy, so upon the Combine's inevitable victory, what few of them that already lived were experimented upon mercilessly in an effort to control and channel their great strength. One after another, they succumbed to the experiments, causing all controllers bound to their minds to die along with them. At last, a single overseer remained, terribly scarred and grafted to a metal throne of sorts, which limited their telekinetic abilities, allowing them to conduct only the will of the Combine. The invaders would install the indentured overseer as administrator of their world, a practice they had carried out all over the conquered territories, their empire far too large to control directly. Under the Overseer's command would be placed the last remaining controllers, an assortment of synths and combined troops from off-world, and finally, the Vortigaunts. Over their co-evolution, the two species had never come into any form of conflict, the Vortigaunts too primitive for the Overseers to acknowledge, and the whim of the controllers too complex for the Vortigaunts to understand. Like everything else though, the Combine had forced them into servitude. Whilst they had too been experimented upon, either their simple nature or the ever-present vortescence had prevented the Combine from transforming them into any form of abomination. Instead, they were merely applied with control collars and set to work, a plentiful and expendable labour force that the Combine's engine of war so needed. Even though the being now calling itself Nihilanth held no ill will towards the Vortigaunts, it did what it must, for eventually they would become integral to its plans. Unbeknown to the Combine, the Nihilanth had retained more strength and free will than it had been believed, playing along with the directives of its oppressors until they became confident in its servitude, eventually diverting resources meant to control it to more pressing issues within the Empire. Now trusted to work alone for the interests of the Combine, the Nihilanth could freely put an escape plan into action. It had noticed that in all their travel between dimensions, the Combine appeared completely oblivious of Zen, their portal technology incapable of travelling there. As such, this would be the safe haven for all on this ruined world, controller and Vortigaunt alike, a place where they could build an army of their own and strike back at the Combine. Despite their lofty ambitions, the control exerted over the Nihilanth was still far too great for the exodus to be completed without being noticed. As it turned out, there were more parties in the heavens than just the Combine though, and as if cooled by the Nihilanth's plans, one of the more enigmatic would offer its assistance. Apparently the thought of a Zenian army raised only to battle the Combine was agreeable to this benefactor's employers. He agreed to transport all of the Nihilanth's forces to Zen for safekeeping until he could locate a world outside of the Combine's reach. But in reality, this would be yet another ploy in the machination of those beyond even the Nihilanth. Even so, upon their arrival in Zen, the Vortigaunts, still under their overseer's control, were set to the grueling task of mining the floating islands and constructing a great factory where the army would be created. Locking himself away, as he had on their homeworld, the Nihilanth surrounded himself with Zenian crystals in an effort to recapture enough power for the task ahead. He would delegate control of the Vortigaunts to the controllers and wait, fruitlessly, for the supposedly benevolent being to return. Within the factory, Vortigaunt and controller DNA would be spliced together and augmented with that of some of the more lethal species in Zen, until a brute of a creature was created. They would fashion armor and breed living weapons for these new soldiers, creating entire assembly lines to equip them. More and more time would pass, with the hope of their apparent saviour's return dwindling. Once again it would be up to the Nihilanth alone to preserve what was left of its world, in whatever form that may be. And so, when the strange alien creatures began emerging into Zen, stealing the crystals and abducting its servants, the Nihilanth knew that it was only a matter of time before they would be able to escape. Then, as if by random, portals began opening to the world of these interlopers, and the Nihilanth took this opportunity, using all of its power to hold open the gateway, so an advanced guard of Vortigaunt, an armoured grunt, could establish a foothold, allowing the rest of their people to eventually traverse the portal and make this world their new home. Little did the Nihilanth realise that it had been their benefactor who had initiated the resonance cascade, linking Earth to Zen. While the Zenian forces laid waste to the armies of Earth, a lone trespasser had arrived in the border world, merely another, the Nihilanth believed, who would certainly fall to the deadly fauna of Zen. It was a surprise then, when this single man went on to defeat the great headcrab mother and infiltrate the factory. At this point the Nihilanth began to realise what was happening, and that this free man may very well have been sent to kill him. The creature known to some as the G-Man had never been interested in saving the Nihilanth's people, only using them to raise the army that he was now about to take for himself. In his own way, the Nihilanth would plead with Freeman, attempting to communicate his past and warn him of the G-Man, but ultimately he knew this human would never understand, foreseeing what it must come to. Inevitably the two come to blows, Freeman whittling down the Nihilanth's power until he can land a final death blow, killing every controller bound to him and finishing the genocidal task the Combine had begun. With the Nihilanth gone, the G-Man indeed confronts Freeman, as was warned, and informs him that Zen and the army that resides within is now under their control, as it had been planned all along. Ultimately, Vanillanth's attempt to save his race had failed, and in the process he had played directly into the hands of a power far more devious than even the Combine. The struggle was far from over though, for just like on Vanillanth's homeworld, the portal activity had drawn the attention of the Combine to Earth. Only not all had died in Vanillanth's defeat, and the now free Vortigaunts would stand willingly alongside humanity to face the foe who had enslaved them so long ago, and the one who had betrayed their master. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, then please consider liking the video, subscribing and sharing it with your friends. If you want to support the channel even more, then head over to Patreon, become a channel member, or buy some merch. Links are all down in the description. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time.